Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Books that I've been reading and authors that I've been interviewing. And today we are joined by Aimie Runyan. Yes, friend of the podcast, Aimie Runyan's back for her third time. She's coming us live from Estes Park, Colorado, and she's talking about her new book. I got it right here for you. You really want to get this one. Mademoiselle Eiffel, or Eiffel, as she says. That's the French way they say it. Mademoiselle Eiffel. Wonderful, wonderful book. You know, I love Aimie. She's a wonderful writer. And this biographical fiction that she's written about Claire Eiffel is out of this world. We're going to have a wonderful talk with her. We're going to get into Gustave Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower, all that he's built, including but not limited to the infrastructure for the Statue of Liberty. And his one major disaster, the building the locks for the Panama Canal, that became a terrible, terrible fiasco in France, where he was actually arrested and tried. Yeah, they tried him, criminal prosecution. It was unbelievable. We're talking, this is about Claire, how at age 14, she had to step in and be a mother to her younger sisters, a sister, a big little sister to her older brothers. She took over running Gustave's businesses and affairs. She was his right-hand person. He went to just like around 2-3 days after the mother died, they're off to Portugal, and there's Claire thrust into the role of being a hostess and planning things. And it's amazing. The research that Aimie did was out of this world. I couldn't find anything, but she got into the actual official family archives and was able to get all this information about Claire. There's wonderful stuff. If any of you ever gone to the top of the Eiffel Tower, there's a little apartment up there that Gustave built. And in there's 3, I guess they're wax statues. One of Gustave Eiffel, one of Thomas Edison, who went to see him, and the other person there is Claire Eiffel. Yeah, no one knows who she is. Amy's going to shed a little light in this whole thing in this book. It's a wonderful book. It's a delightful book. It is a great, great read. I love anything and everything Aimie Runyan does, and you will too. Give it a chance. Let's go right to our interview now with Aimie Runyan. Aimie, welcome to Books and Looks.
Well, thank you for having me, Blaine. It's so great to be back.
Wow. This is the third time.
Yes. Yeah, very exciting. I love coming back.
You keep cranking out powerhouse books, and I keep bringing you on because I love your writing. It's good stuff.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That means a lot. It's been a very busy 1.5 or 2 years. And, I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to publish so many books in such a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I can understand why your publisher wants to do it, too. Keep cranking them out. They're good. That's the thing. Good stuff.
Thank you.
I'm not cranking them out like a machine, but they're always good. They're always different, about different people. But there's one common denominator: France. That's the common denominator. Mm-hmm. There you go. Hey, let's see. The last time we chatted, it was your daughter's last day in elementary school, and you were
she's in 6th grade.
You were lamenting the fact you didn't have a child in elementary school anymore. How's middle school?
Yeah, I'm officially the mother of a middle schooler, and it really does feel like I've kind of graduated to the next stage of parenting. She's doing volleyball after school now, and so it's we've moved into just a busier phase. Like I feel like I don't even see her all that much because she's in volleyball until 5, and then she's got homework and everything, and it's just. It's a different phase, and my son's getting super into robotics, and so the schedule's getting complex, and it's fun. I have to say, it's, carting kids around and doing a lot of extra things. It's fun and great for them to have the opportunity to express themselves and find their own interests, but it's very different than having the little kids running around and, little ankle biters. And I miss it, but, it's great to see them coming into themselves, too.
Great. Very good.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're out in there in Estes Park, Colorado. Does Estes Park have its own school district, or are you part of the Denver school district? Where are you at?
No, we are definitely, we have our own little school district, and it's wonderful because we live 7 minutes from the school, and the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school all basically share a parking lot. And so there isn't, I remember, I come from a small town of like 10,000 people, but the elementary school was on the opposite side of town from the high school and the middle school. And the middle school was down the road, a ways from the middle school. So my parents were, driving back and forth, trying to make kids, make sure that we were all where we needed to be at the right time. And we don't have to worry about that kind of, hustle and bustle. And it's like a kid needs to run and go do an activity. It's a 7-minute drive. And so,
Mhm.
it makes it so that, I don't know, it feels like it's easier to be part of the school community. And I don't know, it seems a little less overwhelming. And I really love that.
Does it give you more time to write because the kids are in school for longer periods of time?
Yeah, and they do ride the bus, and so that gives me a little bit of a longer morning, which is nice. And it gives me a chance to get outside and go for a walk often, which is really good for the soul and creativity. But yeah, I'm able to work from roughly 8 to 3:30, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's good. Wonderful. Well, that's great. Say hello to the kids. I'm glad we to talk about them. Okay.
I will,
Hey,
absolutely.
we're going to talk about your newest book, Mademoiselle Eiffel, and I'm going to show it to everybody right here. You have it. I have it. We all have Mademoiselle Eiffel.
Uh,
The first thing that hits me is the cover. This is a
yes.
wonderful cover. Isn't it stunning? Wow. Tell me about the creation of the cover. Yeah.
Well, I said I wanted, because I knew they were going to want a woman on the cover. And I'm like, because it's Mademoiselle Eiffel. Okay. Because I had a couple covers without people on it, and I really liked that. But, this is biographical fiction. She needed to be on the cover. And and I said I wanted her looking up at the tower. The tower had to be red. And I love the idea. I had originally said like it could be transitioning from sketch to completed to lit up, and they kind of reversed the idea on me. And it was good, and we had to work on the dress a lot, but they had this on sketched out on like parchment paper, and it was just too much beige. And so I had a friend who is far better at graphic design. I said, could you just swap out the parchment for blueprint paper, and so I can show them what I'm thinking. And she had to change the color of the font, but it didn't take her very long. And so many thanks to Chris Wilder for doing that. And I sent it on. This is what I'm thinking. Do you think that this would be possible? And it wasn't. I mean, it was aesthetically a big change, but like from a graphic design perspective, it wasn't that hard, and it was easy to find like what's the word? Stock images of blueprint paper that you could use and I doubt they had to pay all that much for it, if anything. And so that was great. And so they were happy to do that. And it made me, I love that they listened, because I feel like it really is an impactful cover. And I think the original version was just too beige, and the blue adds a real pop. So I love that.
You know, all your covers I enjoy. Now, I'm colorblind. Okay. So I need to something really hit me to like it. Yet all your covers of all your books, be it A Bakery in Paris, be it Lavender and Sage, and going back to the other ones, for some reason, your books, I see it, I like it, I love it, and it draws me to it. And that's such a big thing with a book, isn't it?
It is. It really is. The whole you can't judge a book by its cover, I think is kind of false. I think that we can convey a ton of information through the cover. And I think that it is, the publishers and authors know that, and they take it very seriously. I get annoyed when you see books that are obviously trying to reiterate or to pull on the success of another cover. We've seen a lot of covers emulating Lessons in Chemistry, for example, which was a breakout cover. And whereas, this is definitely unique. You can tell it's historical fiction. You can convey a lot through the cover. And like The Memory of Lavender and Sage, they sent me like 12 iterations of a cover. It was almost overwhelming. And I loved that. That they, and they really wanted my ideas. And there was like the same cover with these golden leaves around it or without. And we went for a cover that was really a little bit more subdued. It seems a little bit more upmarket, a little bit more literary. And I love the vibe that it conveyed. And I'm very happy with how that turned out.
Good. Now,
Yeah.
we talk about
Yeah.
covers, and right behind you is one of my favorite books, A Bakery in Paris. And I didn't realize it. There sits an Eiffel Tower. Now, did you know that you were going
Yes.
to write a book about Mademoiselle Eiffel when you did that cover?
No, I just knew that my wonderful editor, Tessa Woodward, said, "We need to figure out a way to put the Eiffel Tower on the cover because it's a bakery in Paris. If it's Paris, there's gotta be an Eiffel Tower." And, of course, the difficulty with a bakery in Paris is that the first, the half of the book takes place in 1870 and 1871, which is, like, almost 20 years before the Eiffel Tower was built in 1889. And so I was thinking about, well, obviously we can depict the bakery as it would have been in the 1940s. And I knew that I wanted a green bakery window. I knew that for sure. And they were just like, here's two bakery windows. Which one do you like? And it was such an easy cover, such an easy cover. But I said, okay, here's how we're going to put the Eiffel Tower on the window. I want you to, or on the cover. Yeah, I want you to put it on the window, and I'm actually going to write in a scene. We were in copy edits at a point, so I had just enough time to be able to put in a few new words. And I'm going to write like a little snippet, not even a scene, where the younger sister of Micheline, the main character from the 1940s timeline, says that she's going to paint an Eiffel Tower on the bakery window to draw in the tourists. Because in the late 1940s, well, it was 1946, 1947, the tourism industry is slowly starting to rebuild. And they're trying to appeal to the tourists, and they're in, Montmartre, in an area that was, and is very popular with tourists. And so Micheline says, have at it, go ahead. And so I was able to write that little scene in so that we could organically incorporate the Eiffel Tower on the cover in a way that felt legitimate for the story.
Mm-hmm. Great. The title, Mademoiselle, I say Eiffel, you say Eiffel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Was that always the working title?
It was what it was. Like, that was one of the first things, like, because there are other books with similar titles, like Mademoiselle Chanel, Mademoiselle Révolution, that exist. And I liked that, kind of spare title that conveys a lot of information, in a small space. And when I sent in the synopsis to Tessa and my agent, Tessa's first thing was, I love the title as it is. And so there was no discussion. It was always Mademoiselle Eiffel because it's her story. And she's always, even after she's married, Mademoiselle Eiffel because of her, her relationship to her father and the importance of her father's family in her life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, most people are unaware of Claire Eiffel or Eiffel. And how did you stumble upon her story? And what made you then inspired to write it?
It was fun is that I was coming up with story ideas, and I wanted to follow up A Bakery in Paris that shows Paris in two periods of time, 1871 and 1946, where it's really emerging from the ashes after two very difficult periods of time. And with, it was such a short period after the Paris Commune and the Siege of Paris that Paris, reclaimed its place as the cultural center of the world. It's at least the Western world. And it was at its zenith in the 1880s and early 1890s. And I wanted to celebrate that. And so I feel like these books are inextricably linked, even though there's no characters in common. There's a little Easter egg. I think they walk by a charming green bakery in Mademoiselle Eiffel, but it's not like they're not, there's no overlapping characters or anything like that. But I do, I wanted to show Paris as it evolved to be so shortly thereafter. And then I was looking at, like, what could I write about the Belle Epoque? And I was reading about the Eiffel Tower because it was so iconic. And I thought I could do Moulin Rouge and Eiffel Tower because, you've got the upper bourgeoisie and you have the lower class and that struggle. And I thought, well, I could write about Claire Eiffel, who I found out stories about her. I'm like, did Gustave have any daughters or a wife that did something amazing? And I found out about Claire. And I'm like, well, there's a heroine right there. And I thought, well, I could do a dual narrative with like one of the head can-can dancers from the Moulin Rouge. And Tessa said, Claire is enough all by herself. And so I was able to weave in the Moulin Rouge stuff through family drama. But
Right.
I like the idea of doing a compare and contrast.
I was terribly disappointed when I saw the Moulin Rouge. I don't know. I was
Oh,
expecting more, bigger, something. I don't know. I was
Oh,
never
in
in it.
real
No,
life,
no. I
you
mean,
mean?
from the outside, it's like, it didn't do anything for me. It just, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But
well, we're a more sophisticated audience nowadays. I haven't been inside. I've seen it from the outside. But it really was kind of unique for its time. They had, it was open air and they didn't stop shows if it was raining. And everybody was expected, poor, rich or poor, to dress to the nines, and they only served champagne. And it was meant to be a place where the poor could have a taste of what they thought upper class living was like. And so it was a place that was meant to be, in a way, sort of equalizing,
Mhm.
but, it was an illusion of it anyway. And it was a really interesting place of its
Right.
time, but now it just kind of seems seedy and run down.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. No little Toulouse-Lautrec running around or anything like that. No, no,
No,
it's
that's right. Yeah, it would have been far more interesting to see the original people. I think Charles Ziedler and Harold Ziedler rather.
exactly. Well, now, most people are familiar with Gustave Eiffel because of the Eiffel Tower.
Mhm.
People don't realize this was a busy architect and slash engineer. What were some of his
Mhm.
major projects? Would you touch on in this book?
Well, the Maria Pia Bridge was really a pivotal one that he was building at the time that his wife died, and and he was working with a man called Seyrig, who was working as his right hand man, and eventually broke off and won other contracts in Portugal, kind of despite Gustav. I think it was kind of a fraught relationship. But Claire really stepped up after her mother died and went to Portugal less than 2 months after her mom died and took over what her mother had been doing, like being at Gustav's side and being extra eyes and ears. And so her role really went beyond the running of the household, which would have been a big enough task for a 14-year-old, even with the help of staff, and the raising of her younger siblings, which is an enormous task for any woman to raise 4 children, the youngest of whom was 4. So this was a big task. This was a big task for Claire. And yeah, and so he also worked on the observatory in Nice, which was a major project with the famous architect Garnier, who built the famous opera house in the middle of Paris. And they had sort of a love-hate relationship that I touch on throughout the book, because Garnier was an outspoken critic of the Eiffel Tower, even though they'd worked on the observatory in Nice together. And I think Gustave felt that pretty acutely. And the Garnier boys attended Gustave's funeral. His sons attended out of respect. So I think they did probably mend their fences. But it was, yeah, I really enjoyed that drama and bringing that onto the page. He worked, of course, on the inner workings of the Statue of Liberty and countless other bridges. Like they could be mail ordered. His bridges could be mail ordered from all over the globe, and they'd ship them off partially constructed. It was kind of a revolutionary thing at the time. Train stations, all manner of buildings on, all over the world, Asia, South America.
You go and you Google or Bing or however you want to search,
Mhm.
uh, you put his name in, and you go down to his projects. His list of projects is just it's just never ending. So
Yeah,
many
yeah, he
and
was so
beautiful.
active. Yeah, he was so active. And Claire was right there behind him. She was there through the busiest part of his career. Her mother died at, kind of early stages. I mean, he was establishing himself, but it was really, the 1880s were when he was at his zenith, and his wife died in 1877. So she was there for it. Claire was there for the heyday.
And that's why you have to understand this, friends, because Claire is there the entire time. She's
Mhm.
14 when this happens, and she stays by her father's side the rest of his life, basically. Okay?
Yes, and they lived together for the rest of his life. Now, after Gustav retired in the 1890s, he did travel some. They had family houses in various places throughout Europe, and they would be separated, but she lived like she maintained his house. And with even though she was married, her husband came to live with them. And the three of them lived together until Gustav and Adolf died. And she lived an extra 10 years. But Gustav and Adolf died within a few months of each other.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you start the book with probably his biggest disaster. And you have
Yes.
Claire right there when it happens. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Panama Canal scandal was the hardest part to write about in this book because it's hard to know. I mean, there was so much drama surrounding the Panama Canal scandal. So for a bit of historical background, almost 800,000 Parisians invested very heavily in the building of the Panama Canal, and they put their life savings, some of them, into this, and some of them all their pensions, and the project ultimately was a failure. But Gustave was brought in to build the locks, a specific part of the canal, and he finished his work on time. But he was brought in too late, ultimately, to save the project. But he did his work on time, and was paid for it. But there were 800,000 Parisians that lost every dime they invested in the project, and people were upset. He made 6 million francs in profit, which I haven't taken the time. I probably did actually at the time when I was writing, but I've forgotten how much that would be equivalent to in modern dollars, because the French franc has gone through a lot of volatility since 1880s. But it was a tremendous amount of money, and they were looking for a scapegoat, and Lesseps and Eiffel really were the scapegoat. But I think that Gustave ultimately was not as responsible for it as many others. Should he probably have not taken money for the work done? Probably. But apart from that, he really wasn't the responsible party. But he was sentenced to 2 years in jail, and only thankfully served a week. But I think that kind of broke his spirit, and he ended up basically retired and tinkering from that time onward. He didn't build any other major projects, and in fact made plans to distance himself from the company Eiffel, and they renamed it so that he wouldn't take the company down with him.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because you say, should he have not been paid? What was he supposed to do? To work for free? He put a lot
Or
of
at
work
least
in.
not taking a profit.
Well,
Maybe,
yeah.
because so many people had lost so much.
Yeah.
It might have politically been the right thing for him to kind of just give the money back. But, at least the profit. I mean, should he have lost out money? Maybe not. Because, he had to pay his workers, and they deserved to earn a living wage. But it was horrible working conditions. Horrible working conditions. I mean, there was a disease. There were angry, people living in the area that were, often attacking the people working on the bridge. The heat, the humidity, it was terrible. There's a reason it's one of the most dangerous places on earth, the Darien Gap. And, the fact that, you can't drive from North to South America, because it is just such a rough place on earth. So, the fact that he was able to do his part of the project is rather remarkable, really.
Well, one of the things that, and I was going to bring this up later, but we started talking about it now. Let's fast forward to that now a minute. He goes in 1883. He goes on trial, and or yeah,
93.
83 or 93, 1893. He goes on
93.
trial, right? And the papers bring up that he's Jewish. He has Jewish ancestry. Okay, and the minute
Yeah,
that
or
I
they
read
intimate
that,
that. Yeah.
right, the minute I read this, I'm thinking of the Dreyfus affair 1 year later. And the French, as usual, screwed up in that era badly. They lost the war
Badly.
with, badly, and they're going to try to pin anything on the Jews, okay? And that's had nothing to do with it. They didn't care what his ancestry was before. Now all of a sudden, maybe Jewish.
Yeah, the Bonnickhausen.
Now,
So they're really, it was Gustave Bonnickhausen Eiffel, and the Bonnickhausen. They immigrated from Germany in the 1700s. They'd been in France for a century, and they were tapestry makers, which I touch on a bit in the book. And I mean, Claire and Gustave were devout practicing Catholics, and whether or not they had Jewish ancestry remains to be seen. I don't know, but it was, of course, the anti-Semitism was just an easy little dig for the media to grasp a hold on. Because that was a prevailing sort of sentiment at the time, and it's really unfortunate. But yeah, the affaire Dreyfusard the next year was a big scandal. This man was basically dragged through the mud for a crime that he was not I think he was entirely innocent of it, but
Completely.
they decided to make a scapegoat out of him because he was conveniently Jewish,
Mhm.
and,
That's right.
it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
It's so typical of trial judges too. Trial judges, let the next guy make the decision. I don't want to say this. So we're going to convict him here. Let the appellate court do something. Let the next level up do something.
Yeah.
I've seen that too often in my legal career. I know how judges act. Okay, and so they just, it is quite the shame. Quite the shame what happened to them. Like you said,
Yes.
he did give up basically at what he was doing. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. Let's
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about the research you had to do for Claire, because I can barely find anything. I mean, I looked everywhere, and what'd you find?
Okay, so I actually reached out because there is an Association de la Famille Eiffel, the Association for the Eiffel family, and I reached out to their president, who's a man by the name of Sylvain Itman Eiffel, who is Claire's great to the third degree grandson, I want to say. I've done the math because they have like the whole family tree online and everything, and they're invested in two missions, which is preserving his architectural works that still exist. Of course, some of the bridges are becoming unusable, but they want to preserve them in some capacity as much as they can, and then to preserve the legacy. And so that's why I touched on the Panama Canal scandal very carefully because I didn't want to upset anyone. Because I honestly don't think that Gustave was the guiltiest party by a long shot. But Claire is basically a character that is largely missing from history, but despite the fact that her likeness is at the top of the Eiffel Tower in wax. Next to you've got Gustave and then Thomas Edison, if you've heard of him. They're sitting back in their chairs, legs crossed, casually, like they're chatting about light bulbs. I don't know, and Claire is standing behind them, looking like she's ready to serve coffee. And it's like, oh, and his very beautiful daughter Claire was there. She was a side note in all of this. And there's a few articles about her, like what was her role, and wasn't that interesting that she was so integral in what her father did. She basically has a little cameo in the new movie Eiffel that was made in France, and but she's really just kind of a side note when she even makes history books at all. And so I went to I talked to Sylvain and via email, and he said that all the family archives are housed at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. And I was going to France that summer on vacation, and I was given one day in the archives, to just rapidly take photos with my phone and get as much as I could. And that was enough to get me through writing the first draft. But it really was a case of extrapolating the woman from where her father was and what he was doing, and trying to bubble up some of the essence of her from the tone of her letters. There was a lot of correspondence, but a lot of it, the correspondence was right at the period at the very beginning of the book in the late 1870s. And then after the building of the Eiffel Tower, because the two of them were together so much that there wasn't a lot of correspondence. There wasn't a need for them to write letters. So, between Claire and Gustave, because most of the correspondence is either to or from Gustave, but there was a pile of letters from Claire to other members of the family after her mother died, expressing concern for, her younger siblings when she's away in Portugal, and checking in on them by writing to her aunt who was watching after a couple of them. And so, that's where I was able to find it. And then, so I wrote the first draft, and then I went back to Paris for an entire week by myself and got 2.5 days in the archives, and the rest of the time to like go visit the places that were important to the book. And also, I'm going to start posting some of those pictures online a little bit more frequently now that we're kind of bubbling down from the big buzz of release. But yeah, like the church where she was married, the exterior of her home, that is now like insurance buildings. It's on the Rue de Prony, and then their big mansion on the Rue Rabelais is now the Israeli embassy. And so it's been torn down. It's a modern building, which is sad because it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. But yeah, I got to spend an entire week on by myself. before developmental edits, to spruce it all up. And I think it made a lot of difference. I think it made a lot of difference, and I was able to really get into the heart and soul of, like, the Panama Canal stuff that I hadn't been able to find as much on here in the States. And getting to see these places that were important to her was also just really meaningful.
She was thrust into the position of sister, big sister, little sister to the boys, and mother. Why wasn't the aunt more of their life? That's what I sort of surprised, because there was an aunt who was sort of there, but she never really helped out at the house.
She watched the kids from time to time, but from what I can tell, Claire was the one that was given the reins to the household, and Marie had her own affairs to see to. Her Aunt Marie was really given. She was married, she had her own affairs, and they probably traveled a lot. But she's not a character that, I mean, she existed in real life, but there was not a lot of information about her, other than I know that she was looking after some of the kids when Claire went to Portugal shortly after their mother died. Yeah, and she was the oldest of 5 kids, and so she'd been gradually taking over the role of mother hen while her mother was sick. And so to step into that role in a more official capacity after her mother died was probably rather a natural thing.
Yeah. Biographical fiction. How much is history and how much is creative imagination?
Well, that I think that, if we're talking about the genre as a whole, I mean, I think the answer is it depends. Now, Claire is a character where it would necessitated a lot of invention. I don't know if she was an artist. I don't know how she felt about marrying Adolphe. I don't know a lot of these things, but I know that I can tell from the photographs that she adored her children. You can't fake that. You just can't. And I think that her husband was the one taking a lot of the photographs of her, and there are not a lot of letters between the two because I think they were together a lot. But I think that, it's very logical that the marriage was something that was at least casually contrived by Gustave. And so, I think that is a pretty logical step to take. I felt comfortable doing that.
Wasn't that a hoot that he sort of invites Adolphe to a dinner and, oh, look who's here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, just, a random run of happenstance, because he can see that Adolphe is interested from the moment that he sees Claire. But, Claire is the one that takes some persuading, because it's not just that her father is, pushing her in a direction when, so many of the decisions in her life have already been made. And that's a tough pill for her to swallow. But also she sees Adolphe taking her place as far as being, taking over, his, being, his biggest advisor. And, she feels like, she clings to that importance. So few women in that era were given that level of importance. And to feel herself being pushed back in the domestic sphere, I think would have been really off-putting for Claire. And I think that she comes to love her husband very, very much. But I think that she loved being in the center of her father's business.
Yeah. I was talking to a neighbor's friend, a neighbor's child, not a friend, neighbor's child the other day. She's 11 or 10. And I asked her, because she was in Paris, I said, did you go to the top of the Eiffel Tower? She goes, yes. I went into that little room at the top. I said, and who was there? Well, she said there was, there was Gustave Eiffel, and there was Thomas Edison, and there was this lady there. I said, yeah, that's his daughter, Claire. Oh, I didn't know that. I said, do you know why they were there? Well, she had no earthly idea why they were there. Why don't you tell us that little bit about that meeting? Because that was a big deal, not just others, but then especially Edison, the meeting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Edison came over toward the end of the World's Fair. I think it wrapped up in October of 1889, and he was there around mid-September, like I want to say the 12th of September, if memory serves. And it was a big deal because they'd been entertaining muckety mucks for months at that point, kings and queens and all the mucky mucks from all over Europe and all over the world had come to the top of the Eiffel Tower. But Thomas Edison coming to visit was a banner moment, because first of all, there I mean, Gustave Eiffel and Thomas Edison were sort of birds of a feather. They were, they were great minds of their time. And so I think that they were very much impressed with one another, with each other. And I think that they were very anxious for the opportunity to meet and to, discuss their big ideas. And so they orchestrated this lovely luncheon at the top of the Eiffel Tower. And, Gustav is walking on his way to the Eiffel Tower and happens upon Charles Gounod, the famous composer, and said, "You want to come play the piano for Thomas Edison and at the top of the Eiffel Tower?" You can imagine, like, and he even wrote a few bars of music that they saved the scrap paper from that meeting. I got to touch a piece of paper that Charles Gounod had written some sheet music on, just a few bars of sheet music. And that was just absolutely incredible. And it's such, just to be able to touch those archives was amazing. But it was, really a meeting of the minds. And so Thomas Edison brought his wife, it was his second wife because his first wife had died. And she was very young. And his daughter Dot, who was not all that impressed with her stepmother. And his twins were his young kids were named Dot and Dash. Those were their nicknames for the telegraph. And I thought that was adorable. And but Claire organized the entire meal. She was like 9.5 months pregnant. So that's one thing the mannequin doesn't show you. She's ready to pop. But thankfully, the elevators were working by that point. Early on, when the tower was built, you had to hoof it up for the first few months. But they got the elevators working by September. But
Wow.
and Gustav, it's really interesting is that Thomas Edison said that Gustav looked so tired and worn down from all the falderall of running the tower, and because he really was expected to be, the ambassador of the tower and be present at a lot of things. And he'd gone to take waters in Evian, to go take a bath as one did and take the waters in Evian, and it seemed to, he didn't seem all that rejuvenated. So Thomas Edison was really worried about him. So I
Yeah.
found that really
Yeah.
interesting.
That was, yeah. It's interesting because throughout the book, while Gustav is doing his thing and he's doing the architectural and engineering, anytime we need to have a little bit of an idea or a little something to push the project just to where it's supposed to be, Claire says something. Bloop.
Yep.
Oh, that makes
And
sense. Yeah.
yeah, well, she was the ideal woman behind the guy, and she was an expert in parlor politics, but she knew people. She was definitely at her core a politician. She knew how to work a room. And I think that, I like the idea of her being a situation handler. And she always, and I go into this in a fair amount of detail in the book, she always has to keep a level head because if she starts to get upset about something, that she'd be branded as hysterical and they won't listen to her. So the only way she stands a chance, and it's not even a perfect chance at that, for her husband and father to listen to her is for her to be the cool head in the room at all times. It's a hard burden to put on somebody who, we all get mad. And sometimes you need to pop off, but she never had that luxury because she could not be branded as hysterical or nobody would have listened to her.
And that's the thing. So much, as you point out in the book, so much about what happened to Claire was not quite fair. Again, at 14 to be thrust into these roles, to have to do this, to be the big sister, to be the little sister, and the helping the father in many ways. And then maybe one of the weirdest things was just like a couple days after her mother died, the father said, "Would you like to move into your mother's room?" Wow,
Yes.
that had to be difficult.
Yes. And that was a contrivance of my own, but I like the idea of him, like symbolically giving her the reins of the household and, managing her mother's, dealing with her mother's effects, her clothes, her jewelry, etc. Because he couldn't bear to do it. And I like the idea of him giving her basically the full reins of the household and treating her with the respect of the lady of the house from a very early stage. And it definitely put her grandmother's nose out of joint because her grandmother thought it was absolutely inappropriate. And her grandmother really was, according to historical record, quite the formidable woman. And Claire did write to her aunt, worried about the effect that Bonne Maman would have on Laura, her second, her next younger sibling. And So there was definitely concern there, and she was really a driving force behind her husband's career and her son's career. And when she got a notion in her head, it would have been hard to disabuse her of it. So I like that I started and stopped this book and tried to figure out where to start this book 3 different times, but it was really the argument between Bonne Maman and the rest of the family, or Gustave really, about Claire's future. That was really the natural play. I realized this is where the book needs to start. It's starting with the action, not just waiting for their mother to die and, them being stuck in a nursery, just waiting for the horrible news that they're all expecting, which was one of the openings I toyed with.
Hmm.
But this
Yeah.
one definitely felt like it had momentum.
The grandmother was tough. I mean, she was tough. Send her away. And then they stuck the one daughter with her. Go, you go until Christmas. You handle your grandmother.
Yeah, poor Laura. Yeah, and that was taken from history. Like, yeah, because I saw the letters where Claire was worried about the influence that Mademoiselle Eiffel would have on Laura, and she was definitely depicted throughout in a lot of secondary sources as quite the formidable woman. So I felt really comfortable making a clash between the two of them, and I had a lot of fun with Mademoiselle Eiffel. So 2 books in a row with kind of an overbearing grandmother figure. I
Right.
promise I won't make it a theme.
Ah,
I don't think,
okay.
yeah, Wandering Season doesn't have any mean grandmas. So there you
Okay.
go.
Well, that's good. That's wonderful. Hey, listen, now at the very end, we have
Hmm.
Claire sitting with her granddaughter, and she gives her a camera, which made her granddaughter extremely happy. Made her extremely
Hmm.
happy. What do we know about her granddaughter? Was she into photography? Do we know anything about
Yes,
that?
so that was actually, and Solange Granet became a pretty renowned photographer. You can find like copies of she published a book of photography about the Place de la Concorde, if memory serves. And so she was a fairly serious photographer. I mean, I have no idea if Claire ever gave her first camera. She was 10 when her granddaughter was 10 years old when Claire passed away. That much I do know, Solange. But I do know that Solange did publish photography books, and I love the idea of it being Claire who gave her the camera
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged
Mm-hmm.
her to pursue her passion.
Right.
Yeah, and I knew that was going to be my ending chapter for a long
There you go.
time.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I love that she said to her, "Oh, you'll be taking such wonderful pictures, such beautiful pictures." And I'm sitting to myself, and in 8 years, they're invading Paris.
Hmm.
What pictures did she take then? Ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay, ay.
That's true. That's true. It's
Difficult
true.
times. Yep.
Yeah, but they lived through it. They managed the Eiffel family weathered it, pretty much intact, and
Okay.
that's pretty remarkable for such a
Yeah.
horrid period in history. And and it would have been interesting if they had, if things had gotten even a little bit worse, if their supposed Jewish ancestry would have caused even
Yeah.
more
Oh, my.
problems.
You're right. I never thought of that. Now, one of the things, again, I just can't read your books without doing research. So I'm doing research about Gustave, and I'm sitting there saying, "Wow, look, his name's no longer in the company, but the Eiffel Tower was only supposed to be standing for 20 years, but thanks to maybe Thomas Edison having a chat with Gustave, I'm not sure, but what did Gustave do to actually make that last till it's still existence?"
Well, I think that he was using it for scientific exploration, radio, and he did a lot of work toward aviation during World War One. Things I would have loved, like I mean, if I'd had like a second book to be able to write, Gustav was working on aviation in World War One. Claire was running hospitals in Switzerland. It was I mean, they were definitely like key actors in World War One, trying for the French side, obviously, and I think that it just was such a popular monument that France or Paris itself couldn't they basically, I'm not sure if the land was purchased by the Eiffel family. I don't think it was. It's now I'm sure it belongs to the patrimoine, the French government. Um, but it was such a moneymaker and it was so popular and useful from a scientific perspective that there was no reason to tear it down. So they just decided, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And it just got extended and extended. Now it's obviously a permanent fixture. They
Yeah,
would never tear it down.
never, never.
Yeah,
Now,
the big controversy now is when they're going to take the Olympic rings off of it.
ah,
Yeah.
I had a conversation with an author who was in Paris during the Olympics, and
Nice.
she had done something from what was it? That she was at the NPR studios trying to get home. She couldn't make it home, but so she did an interview with me sitting on a park bench in Paris. Now, I don't know if they have internet there or Wi-Fi there, but I had the best connection ever talking to that lady in the middle of Paris. And
Nice.
it's amazing. I got to think they got to have something. The Eiffel Tower is right up there. Their communications is something else.
Yeah, they must. They must.
I bet. One thing. I'm missing. I'm missing it. There are no recipes. There are no recipes in this book, Aimie. Why?
I know
Why?
the first
Why?
book. Well, I first of all, I promise you there are recipes in my next book. But this book really was a departure from my previous two that were so food centric. A Bakery in Paris and The Memory of Lavender and Sage are extremely food centric, and all of my contemporary fiction that I have envisioned for the future is very food centric. But this one, she was organizing dinner parties, and but she was never in the kitchen, and so it didn't lend itself to that sort of foodie sort of thing. But I am going to do a recipe video in the coming weeks for proper Parisian hot chocolate.
Okay.
Now that the weather is cooling down, and so that way, I'm going to do one recipe and share that online. But it didn't make it into the book. But there are some lavish food descriptions, but I did have to cut those back. And I still had a reviewer ding me a little bit for lavish food descriptions, but it's not as much as one might expect after having read my previous two books.
And if we know Amy Runyan's books, if there's food in there, they're going to have a proper title. And when I do my search, boom, 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 there it is. Pau de Dieu. Is that what it's called? Pau de Dieu?
Pau de Dieu, which is the bread of the gods that are very famous in Portugal, breakfast sort of pastry. And, I like the idea of everything in Portugal being like similar enough to France that they understood what it was, but it's just different enough that it didn't feel like home.
Right. My wife loves to bake, and she's going to be making that. My wife
fabulous. Fabulous.
And also, you had a lamb shank Navarine, something like that.
Lamb shank Navarine. And I'm trying to remember that scene, but it was definitely, that was definitely one of the more in-depth food chapters.
Yeah, I like that. See, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the food is such an important key to the culture. I feel weird leaving it out.
It is. It is. Now, you've dropped a little hint that we have another one coming out. Okay.
Yes.
Your next book's done already, I guess. What's coming up? Tell me what's coming up?
Yeah, April 1st, 2025, The Wandering Season, coming to us from the good folks at Harper Muse, and it's a story of Veronica Stratton, who is a Colorado girl like me. And she comes up to Estes Park for Christmas, and so I got to write a chapter set in my beautiful hometown. And she's fresh out of a bad breakup, and her sister gives everybody DNA kits for Christmas, and it leads to a lot of drama. She is suspected for many years that she's adopted, but never pursued it or pushed the idea with her parents because she didn't want to rock the boat. And she says, "Oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine." But the crux of the issue is that it really wasn't, and her life is, she's altered the course of her life because of that knowledge. And she's here's where the food comes in. She's a food matchmaker. She's a high-end food broker that that finds, tries to pair food purveyors like farmers and artisan food crafters with restaurants and gourmet grocery stores. And so she decides to use this trip, and, she'd always wanted to be a chef. And so she goes off on this niche little tangent for a business, which is, starting to bloom, but she's going to have to make a decision. Is she going to pursue the kitchen muse, or is she going to be a chef? And she travels all throughout Europe to visit the places where her ancestors were from, because her family feels so terribly about, her admission. Like, yeah, I've known for a while. And so she gets to travel, and she sees visions of her foremothers on the point where they decide to emigrate to America. And so we get to see the west coast of Ireland, a beautiful village in the southwest of France, Baynac-et-Cazenec, and a little village outside of Milan, and very brief stint in Copenhagen.
That's April 1st. That's in the can. Is your next one already up there? Is it being formulated up there already?
Oh
Or are you
yeah,
starting to put it on
I'm
paper?
working.
Yeah.
I'm working on my next historical, which is going to be a bit of a pivot. If it all pans out, I can't tell you too much about it yet, but I will say Ireland.
Okay.
That's the key word for that one. And
Okay.
I got to spend quite some time in Ireland this summer. It was great. I was just like, okay, Muse, come on. And
Yeah.
I finally, after I got back, the idea went.
It hit you. Yep.
And so I'm working on the proposal for that, and we'll see where that takes us.
Wow. Always something perking from the
Always something.
brains and the mind of Aimie Runyan. Always good stuff. I read them all. I can't wait to get the next one. Whew, boy, I'll tell you, good stuff, Aimie, always.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you taking your time to come on with us today on Books and Looks. And like I said, best of luck with Mademoiselle Eiffel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, Aimie, I'm ready for the next book. This was so good. I can't wait for your next one to come out. I tell you, this was some great book. I really enjoyed it, friends. I think you're going to like it a lot. Mademoiselle Eiffel, however you want to pronounce her name, it's going to be okay. It's a great book, a good story, and that's what I like. I like good stories. If you like good stories, this is an author, and this is a book you're going to like because she writes wonderful stories. But what am I looking at? Well, what's coming next? We have a change. Oh, yeah, we have a change. Next week, we're going to bring on Sarah Albee. Now, what is a change? She writes children's books. That's right. She's got a new book out called Bounce. Bounce, yeah. It's the history of rubber, and it's written for kids. That's right. She started out writing for the Children's Television Workshop, which is Sesame Street. She's written over 150 books, all sorts of topics, but it's a kid's writer. I don't know. It's not as easy as you think to write for children, but Sarah's been doing a lot of that, and she's an award winner. I don't want you to miss that. I know I can't wait to chat with her. So anyway, that's coming up next week. So anyway, on behalf of my website, viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks, saying may all your leaves be pages in a book. So long.